So I was thinking about the brilliant rugby from the Six Nations at the weekend. I was looking at the brand newly published Rugby World Rankings, and I was reflecting again on what a farce. I don't think there's any other word for it. The draw for the Rugby World Cup 2023 is. So I thought I'd have a little deep dive into this video and just examine what might have been and what could be done in future to avoid the same thing happening, where there's quite a lot of fans feeling a bit aggrieved at how the World Cup this year may play out in relation to the hard work that the teams have done. And the new world rankings after round 3 of the Six Nations, they've been published. And there we are. It's no change at the top, with Ireland still in #1 spot ahead of France. And Wales, the losers on this particular occasion, they dropped down to 10th, their lowest ever world ranking after their defeat to England. Of course, if you're Ireland, if you're France, if you're New Zealand, if you're South Africa, you're looking at those other 3 teams around you and knowing that you're going to have to face them in a World Cup quarterfinal, and if you get their semi-final, in order to make it to the final and the promised land. And that is because the draw was made based on the rankings back in 2019. And here are the pools for the Rugby World Cup. If I get myself out of the way, so you can just, again, I'm sure you're aware of this, but just so you can appreciate how kind of ridiculous it is. New Zealand and France in the same pool. I'm just focusing on the top 10 teams, by the way, in this video. So I know Italy are resurgent. They're on the way back. And there's some handy teams in the, Fiji are a good team and all the rest of it. But I'm just going to focus on the top 10. New Zealand and France in the same pool. South Africa, Ireland and Scotland in the same pool. Wales and Australia. And England, Japan and Argentina. And like I say, that was because the draw was made based on the rankings at the end of 2019. Now, the draw was actually made at the end of 2020, but because of COVID, World Rugby decided they were going to ignore the rugby during 2020, which I am sympathetic to. I can understand. I think that's reasonable. But nonetheless, even making the draw 3 years ahead of the tournament seems excessive. And I don't see any reason why that can't be brought a little bit closer. And we'll see what difference that would have made. So, yeah, if you're Ireland, if you're Scotland, South Africa, New Zealand, France, and Italy, you're feeling a bit sore about this. Now, this is the world rankings back on the right-hand side when the draw was made, and on the left-hand side as they are today. So you can kind of see France and Ireland. Well, in fact, let's have a look. Some teams have really risen. Ireland and France, Scotland and Argentina have gone up a couple of places. They've improved upon their position from when the draw was made and where they sit today. Similarly, there are some teams which are feeling very, very fortunate, and I'm an England fan, and I can tell you I'm feeling quite grateful that the draw was made when England were 3rd ranked in the world and not where they stand today at number 6. Same goes for South Africa and especially Wales, who have plummeted from 4th to 10th. But like I say, the draw was made based on the rankings on the right-hand side that you can see there. And if the draw was made today, this is what the pools would look like. Again, I'm just focusing on the top 10 teams. But don't you look at this as Rugby World Cup pools and think, yeah, that feels about right. Every team you feel has got a fighting chance. Japan will look back at the 2019 World Cup and they'll feel confident that they can get out of that pool with Scotland and Ireland. But equally, Ireland and Scotland are feeling confident themselves. And there's no team that's out of it. And it kind of feels like it's merit-based. It just feels right, doesn't it? Obviously, if you're a Wales fan, you probably say, no, leave it as it is. And I, as an England fan, I'm saying the same. But what we want is we want the best tournament we can have, and we want it to feel like all the hard work that's going on is being rewarded. And, look at that compared to the pool that Ireland are actually in. And it doesn't feel like the last year or two they've had is being rewarded. Now, there are reasons why the draw is made ahead of the World Cup. Logistics, planning, there's a lot that goes into it. So I think it's unreasonable to think that the draw should be made now. That this is too close. But could it be made at a different time? Let's examine. Here we have, now I said that the Rugby World Cup draw was based on the rankings at the end of 2019 or 1st of January 2020, whichever way you want to look at it. So just to fill in the little gaps we've got so far, here are the world rankings at the end of each year since the last World Cup, 2019, 20, 21 and 22. So you can get a feel for the trajectory that teams have been on. Now, I'm just going to focus on 2021 for a minute, Because like I've said, it's unreasonable to expect World Rugby to make the draw now. I think it's unreasonable to make the draw based on rankings back in 2019, or even, as would happen in a normal year without COVID, 2020. Whereas 2021, 2 years out from a World Cup, that kind of feels reasonable. That feels a good balance between making sure the competition's as good as it can become World Cup time and leaving enough time for logistics and planning to take place. 2 years out from a World Cup, in the midpoint in a World Cup cycle, feels like the right time, doesn't it, to make a draw for the World Cup. And had that happened, this would have been the rankings that were used by World Rugby. And I think what's important to point out is not that much would change, really. In terms of the rankings, England are still up there, whereas, you know, in the next year or so, they're gonna drop down. Ireland haven't yet, by this point, gone up to the top. South Africa haven't dropped. France haven't risen. So I just wanted to add a little bit of balance. What we'd obviously love is for the pool to look like the world rankings now, because that would be a great tournament. But there are logistics involved. And based on 2021, that is what the pools would look like. I do think it looks slightly more fair than the current situation. And I'll expand on this in a second. But this, if you just transplanted the rankings at the end of 2021 instead of at the end of 2019, this is what the World Cup pools would look like. And still, Pool B, that looks pretty spicy, doesn't it? South Africa, France, and Argentina. You feel Argentina could, I mean, they'll feel hard done by. They could spring an upset. But France and South Africa, Scotland will feel happier, obviously. Ireland will obviously feel happier. And England, probably no different. They've just traded Argentina for Wales. So I think it would be fairer. And you get that sense more so when you look at how the quarterfinals could break down. If it goes with seeding and form and everything, the quarterfinals would look like that. You'd still, like the current World Cup, have New Zealand, France, and South Africa all on the same side of the draw, which is brutal. But Ireland, Wales, England, and Australia on the other half of the draw. And so still you'd have to say it's slightly skewed one way, with the New Zealand, France, South Africa, Scotland being a slightly stronger combination of teams, only slightly though, than Ireland, Wales, England, Australia. So it just kind of feels a bit fairer versus what we are potentially looking at, again, only if everything goes to plan or goes to rankings and goes to form. What we're potentially looking at are those as quarterfinals, and there you've got a huge mismatch. I mean, don't get me wrong, those quarterfinal weekends are going to be massive if New Zealand play Ireland or if New Zealand play South Africa, and whatever combination of teams it is, it's going to be absolutely huge. Those games are going to be incredible. It's also made some of those pool games really, really spicy. Ireland against Scotland is going to be massive, not just in 2 weeks' time, but absolutely at the World Cup. So, you know, there are some positives to it, but I do have massive sympathy. And I just think the way that you can see it on the screen on the left there with using the 2021 rankings just feels like a fairer way to go. And I hope, I'm sure that World Rugby are reconsidering the situation with this. And I just really hope that they have a common sense approach. There doesn't seem to be a great deal of common sense with a lot of administration in rugby at the minute. It seems to be chaos and fighting. Maybe we can avoid a similar situation at the next World Cup, and that would be good for everybody. And I say that even as someone who's a fan of a team who massively benefited from the current situation. We will see. Let me know what you think. And if you appreciate the content on the channel, please do hit subscribe. I'm Tim, and this is Egg Chasers. I'll see you on the next video.